It used to be so easy to read Anna. Her laughter was like morning light, warm and soft, and I could always tell when something was bothering her because her fingers would curl around the sleeve of her sweater and she'd blink a little too often. But lately, she'd become a fortress I couldn't breach, and every attempt I made to pull her closer only seemed to push her further away. At first, I told myself it was stress, maybe work or family or just life being difficult. But the silence between us grew louder each night, and her eyes felt miles away even when she was curled up on the couch beside me. I'd make dinner and she'd thank me with a distant smile. We'd talk and she'd nod politely. And when I reached for her hand in bed, she'd tend to be asleep. I started to wonder if I'd done something wrong, something unforgivable, but every time I asked, she'd say everything was fine, and that only made it worse. And then there was Ethan. Smug, polished Ethan with his perfect timing and his constant presence. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Him showing up at the same coffee shop Anna liked, joining group outings with mutual friends, sending her those little check in texts. But I saw the way he looked at her, like she was something he was waiting to take back, and I started to wonder if he knew something I didn't. I didn't want to be that guy, the jealous husband seeing ghosts. But I couldn't ignore the way Anna's face would stiffen when I mentioned him, or how she'd quickly change the subject, or how she started locking her phone with a code I didn't know. I hated the man I was becoming, paranoid and insecure, checking our shared calendar to see when she had meetings and wondering if they were really meetings. But I loved her. God, I loved her more than anything, and every moment she pulled away from me felt like watching my whole world drift out to sea. One night, when she came home late and said Ethan had dropped her off because her car battery died, I just stared at her for a moment too long. Her voice cracked when she explained it, and I nodded, trying to hide the ache in my chest, but I couldn't shake the image of him waiting in his car, smiling as she walked toward our door. I didn't sleep that night or the next, and every kind gesture from her, every kiss on the cheek or thank you for coffee, felt rehearsed, like a performance for someone she no longer wanted to disappoint. I kept asking myself when I became so suspicious, so broken, and whether maybe I was the one who caused this rift between us. But no matter how I twisted it, it always came back to the same conclusion. She didn't love me the way she used to. And I couldn't live like that, not loving halfway, not drowning in doubt. So one evening, as we sat across from each other in the quiet kitchen, the hum of the fridge the only sound between us, I looked into her eyes and said, Anna, I think we need to talk about getting a divorce. She froze, her fork halfway to her mouth, and the look on her face was one I hadn't seen in months. Shock, pain, real emotion. What? She whispered, her voice brittle. I swallowed hard and tried to speak calmly, gently, like I wasn't shattering everything we built together. You're not happy. I see it. You barely talk to me anymore. And I can't keep pretending this marriage is okay when it's not. Maybe it's Ethan, maybe it's something else, but it doesn't feel like you want to be here anymore. Her eyes welled up instantly, and her lip trembled, but she didn't say a word, just got up from the table and walked into the bedroom, quietly closing the door behind her. I sat there alone for hours, listening to the ticking clock, feeling like I'd just torn my heart out with my own hands, and wondering if maybe I was wrong, if maybe I should have tried harder before I gave up on the woman I still loved more than anything in this world. The silence after I told Anna I wanted a divorce was the heaviest thing I'd ever carried, heavier than the guilt that followed, heavier than the suspicion that had been weighing down our home for months, heavier even than the love that still clung to my chest like a stubborn ghost refusing to leave. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay on the couch, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling like it could somehow spell out the answers I needed, answers I should have demanded long ago but was too afraid to confront. The next morning, I heard her moving around the bedroom, opening drawers, closing the closet gently like she didn't want to wake me, and for a wild second, I thought she was packing to leave. My heart thundered as I sat up, each creak of the old couch echoing like a scream in the quiet of our apartment. But when I peeked into the hallway, I saw her standing there, fully dressed, eyes rimmed red, holding a small coffee mug, the one that said, You, me, always. The one I bought her on our anniversary 2 years ago. Uh, She didn't say anything. She just looked at me like she wanted to speak but didn't know how. And after a few seconds, she placed the mug down on the table beside me and whispered, "We need to talk." Her voice was rough, barely audible, and it cracked at the edges like glass under pressure. I followed her into the kitchen where she had already made a pot of coffee, and we sat at the same table where I'd broken her heart just the night before. This time, she didn't sit across from me. She sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the tremble in her arm as she folded her hands tightly in her lap. "You think I'm cheating on you," she said, not as a question, but as a bitter truth she'd tasted long before I said the word divorce. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat locked up, shame washing over me like acid, and I hated how right she was. She sighed and stared down at her fingers, picking at a chipped nail. "It's Ethan, isn't it? You think something's going on between us?" Again, no answer from me, just the tightening of my jaw, the ache of a truth I had convinced myself was undeniable. "There's nothing going on," she said, louder this time, her voice breaking, her eyes finally locking with mine. "I swear to God, George, nothing. I hate that you even think there is." And before I could even begin to doubt her, before I could ask the thousand questions that had been gnawing at my insides, she stood up and walked to the drawer by the fridge. From it, she pulled out a stack of letters, real letters, written in Ethan's unmistakable handwriting, and threw them onto the table with trembling hands. "He's been sending these to me since last year, after his wife left him. He's been showing up uninvited, sending flowers, asking for one more chance." I never replied, not once. I kept them because I didn't know how to bring it up to you without making it seem like I was hiding something. But I wasn't. I just didn't want to feed your paranoia. I thought if I ignored him, he'd go away. I didn't know it would cost me you. I stared at the letters, my heart pounding so violently I could hear it in my ears. I reached for the top one and opened it, skimming the familiar, pretentious script. Ethan's voice practically dripping off the page, talking about memories, regrets, and second chances that never should have been offered. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice hoarse, not out of anger but sorrow, because all the months of distance suddenly made sense. The fear in her eyes, the hesitation in her touch, the coldness that wasn't rejection, but self-preservation. "Because you were already pulling away," she said, tears streaming down her face now. "You were so distant, so bitter. I thought if I told you, you'd think I wanted him. And the truth is, I didn't know how to reach you anymore. Every time I tried to talk, you looked at me like I was the problem, like I was the reason you couldn't breathe. I felt like a stranger in my own marriage. So I shut down, hoping maybe you'd come back to me if I gave you space." I buried my face in my hands, the weight of it all collapsing over me, crushing the hollow pride that had built walls between us. "I never stopped loving you," I whispered brokenly, "but I got scared. I saw Ethan around you and assumed the worst because I thought I wasn't enough anymore. I thought you regretted choosing me." She knelt in front of me, resting her hands on my knees, looking up with eyes that still had the same fire I'd fallen in love with, and said, "I chose you because you make me feel like I'm home, and I've never wanted anything more than to feel safe with you again." My tears finally spilled over, and I reached for her, pulling her into my arms like I'd been drowning for months, and finally found the shore. We sat there for what felt like hours, holding each other, not speaking, not needing to. Because for the first time in a long time, our hearts were finally beating in sync again. The idea that I'd almost given up on her, that I'd almost signed the papers and walked away from the only person who ever truly saw me, it shattered something inside me, but it also gave me something new, something stronger: resolve. I was going to rebuild this marriage from the ground up, even if it meant unlearning every fear I'd held on to, even if it meant starting over and being painfully honest about every wound, every scar, every moment I chose silence over vulnerability. That night, we crawled into bed together for the first time in weeks, and this time, when I reached for her hand, she didn't flinch or pretend to be asleep. She held on tightly, fingers laced with mine, head resting on my shoulder, and whispered, "No more hiding, no more guessing. We talk. Always." And I whispered back, "Always." It's strange how quickly the atmosphere of a home can change. not with renovations or new furniture, but with something as simple and sacred as honesty, with love that's no longer afraid to speak its name out loud. The day after our conversation, everything between Anna and me felt different and so familiar. Like we had stumbled back into the version of us that existed before the silence, before the second guessing, before Ethan's shadow tried to settle between us. She didn't sleep on the edge of the bed anymore, and when I woke up that morning to find her still asleep beside me, breathing softly, one hand resting on my chest like it had instinctively reached for me during the night, I felt something loosen in my chest, like a rope I didn't know had been strangling my heart was finally untied. I watched her sleep for a while, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face, memorizing every quiet detail of her, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to believe that maybe we hadn't lost everything. When she finally stirred, blinking slowly and then smiling softly like it physically hurt her to do it, but she still wanted me to see it, I leaned down and kissed her forehead, whispering, "Good morning, beautiful." She blushed like she used to, like she didn't expect compliments from me anymore and didn't quite know how to receive them, and that hurt more than I can say. Because how did I go so long without telling her how radiant she was, even on the days when her soul looked dimmed by exhaustion? We made breakfast together that morning, something we hadn't done in what felt like forever. I chopped the vegetables while she whisked the eggs, and every so often she'd brush her arm against mine and glance up shyly like we were two high school sweethearts cooking for the first time. And God, I missed that. I missed the warmth of her shoulder against mine, the smell of her shampoo clinging to her hoodie, the tiny humming sound she made under her breath when she was lost in thought. We didn't talk much while we cooked, but we didn't need to. The silence was no longer hostile. It was comfortable, easy, and filled with something sacred: peace. Over breakfast, we both apologized more than once, stumbling over words and emotions that had sat dormant for too long. I told her how sorry I was for not asking the right questions, for jumping to conclusions, for allowing my own insecurity to poison the air between us. She told me how much it hurt to feel suspected, distrusted, like I saw her as guilty before she ever had the chance to explain. We talked about Ethan, really talked. Not just the surface level acknowledgement of his name, but the way his reappearance made her question whether people truly move on from past connections. She admitted something I didn't expect, something that made me inhale sharply. She said, "There was a moment, George, just one moment, when he came to my office unannounced and said all the things you never said to me anymore, that I felt confused. Not tempted, confused. Like maybe someone else saw me more clearly than the man who stopped looking." That hurt, but I respected the hell out of her for saying it. She wasn't telling me to wound me. She was being brave, and I realized then that real love doesn't flinch when the truth hurts. It listens. It absorbs. It grows. I reached across the table and held her hand, whispering, "I'm going to start looking again. Every day, like I did when I first fell in love with you." Her eyes shimmered, and she nodded, squeezing my hand back like it was a lifeline. That day, we took a walk around the neighborhood, a path we used to stroll down every weekend when we first moved in. We stopped at the same bench where we once kissed under falling autumn leaves, and she leaned against my shoulder, saying softly, "Do you remember how you proposed to me here?" I smiled, threading my fingers with hers. "You were shaking," I said. "You thought I was nervous about proposing, but I was actually freezing because you made me leave my coat in the car so I wouldn't ruin the aesthetic." She laughed, full and genuine, and I closed my eyes for a moment, letting that sound soak into my bones. We spent the rest of the day rebuilding, not just through words, but through presence, through shared space, through gentle touch, and reminders of everything we had once been and could still be. We didn't fix everything in a day. Healing isn't like that. But we planted seeds. That night, she surprised me by lighting a few candles around the bedroom and playing our favorite playlist from our early dating days. We danced in the soft light, swaying slowly, bodies pressed close, not saying a word, just listening to the rhythm of memories and promises humming around us. And as I held her cheek against hers, I whispered, "I don't want a divorce. Not ever. I only said it because I thought I'd already lost you." She pulled back just enough to look into my eyes and whispered, "You never lost me. I was right here, just waiting for you to see me again." That night, we made love, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. Every kiss was an apology, every touch a recommitment. We stayed up until nearly 4 a.m., not because we were talking, but because we didn't want to fall asleep and risk waking up in the coldness again. When we finally did fall asleep, wrapped in each other's arms, I dreamed of her laughing in the sun, holding my hand on a bench under falling leaves, and for the first time in so long, I didn't wake up with a weight on my chest. I woke up smiling. It's been 3 weeks since the night we rebuilt everything in a bed full of whispered promises and tear-washed apologies, and every day since has felt like waking up in a world where I get a second chance to love her right. But healing isn't a straight line. It moves in loops, in spirals, in moments that feel like peace, followed by moments that sting with leftover pain. And sometimes we still trip over the broken pieces of what we once were. I still wake up sometimes expecting the cold shoulder, the quiet tension that once haunted the walls of our bedroom, and she still glances at her phone a second longer when Ethan's name pops up at work. Yes, he still sends the occasional desperate message, still clings to the past like it's something sacred, even though Anna's told him in no uncertain terms that she's done, that her future isn't with him. She showed me the last text he sent, a long-winded plea full of what ifs and we were meant to be, and I watched her type the reply with steady fingers as I sat beside her on the couch. She didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. She simply wrote, "I'm married, and I'm in love with my husband. Please stop." Then she blocked him. It was simple, clean, unshakable. And though I should have felt triumphant, I mostly felt relief, not just because she chose me, but because she chose her own peace too. That night, I couldn't stop holding her. I buried my face in her hair as we lay in bed, whispering over and over, "Thank you for not giving up on us." And she whispered back, "You're worth fighting for." That sentence broke me in the best way. I started doing little things again, the kind of things I stopped doing when I thought I was unloved or unneeded. I started leaving sticky notes on the bathroom mirror with silly compliments, making her coffee just the way she likes it before she even gets out of bed, wrapping her in a towel fresh out of the dryer when she steps out of the shower, just so I can see that half-shocked, half-laughing smile she makes. She started doing little things too. She sings while she cooks again. She asks me about my day and really listens, like every word matters. She started wearing that silver necklace I gave her for our second anniversary, the one with the tiny heart pendant that fits perfectly in the hollow between her collarbones. And when I commented on it, she smiled and said, "I wear it when I feel safe again." That hit me so hard I had to turn away before I cried. The best part, we started going on dates again. Real ones, not just sitting silently in front of a movie or grabbing groceries and pretending it counts. I took her to the little Italian place where we had our first proper dinner together, and she wore that navy blue dress I hadn't seen in 2 years, the one with the subtle slit and the open back that used to drive me wild. I couldn't stop looking at her. She blushed when I stared, hiding her face behind the menu and laughing, "Stop it, you're making me nervous." And I said, "Good. I hope you're always nervous around me because I want to keep earning you, over and over again." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, whispering, "Then don't ever stop showing up." And I won't. I can't. Because now that I know what it feels like to almost lose her, to nearly hand over the best thing in my life because I was too afraid to ask the right questions, I've made a vow to never let fear lead this marriage again. But the world doesn't always follow our healing timeline. About a week later, I was picking Anna up from work when I saw him, Ethan, standing near the building's entrance with a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite, and that same arrogant smirk he always wore back in college. For a second, I froze, unsure whether to confront him or walk away. But then I saw Anna walking out the doors, completely unaware, scrolling through her phone. He spotted her too and stepped forward like a man ready to ruin everything all over again. I rushed up first, getting between them, standing taller than I ever have, not out of anger, but out of clarity. "She told you to stop," I said calmly, planting myself between Ethan and the woman I loved. This is harassment now. You're not part of her life anymore, he scoffed. You think she doesn't miss what we had? But before I could answer, Anna stepped beside me, grabbed my hand, and said crystal clear, no, I don't. What we had wasn't real. You only came back because I became something you couldn't control. I loved you once, but I love him now. And that's not changing. Ethan looked like he'd been slapped. He stood there holding the flowers like they were suddenly made of glass, delicate and useless. And for a moment he looked small, so small I almost pitied him. Almost. Then Anna pulled me toward the car without another glance, and I realized that moment was more than just her setting a boundary. It was her choosing our life again and again in the face of temptation, confusion, and the echoes of the past. In the car, I didn't speak at first. I just drove with one hand on the wheel and the other laced with hers, processing what had just happened. She broke the silence. I needed that, she said softly, not to hurt him, but to remind myself that I'm exactly where I want to be. I pulled over, turned to her, and said with more emotion than I'd shown in years, do you still want to be married to me? She looked at me like I was a little insane for even asking. More than ever, she said. You're not the man I almost lost. You're the man who came back for me. And in that moment, sitting in a parked car with her hand in mine, I knew that we were past the worst. The wounds were still healing, but the bleeding had stopped. We were rebuilding. Not just a marriage, but a friendship, a partnership, a forever. And she still chose me every day. That's all I'll ever need. Like some stories don't end with grand fireworks or some once in a lifetime twist. They end in quiet rooms filled with steady hearts, in shared morning coffee, in the sound of laughter echoing from a kitchen where love has been replanted like a tree that was once dying but refused to fall. It's been 2 months since Anna told Ethan to leave our lives for good. And even now, I catch myself pausing in the middle of the day, overwhelmed by the simple miracle that she's still here, that we're still here. I used to think love had to be loud, dramatic, overwhelming, like the first time you fall for someone. But now I know love is most powerful when it's soft, when it chooses to stay even when it's easier to leave. We live slower now, not because we've lost our passion, but because we've learned to breathe together again. We spend weekends in bed watching reruns of shows we've seen 100 times, not because the plot surprises us anymore, but because her head on my chest and her laughter in sync with mine is all the story I need. There's a rhythm between us now, one that only comes from surviving storms and still reaching for each other in the aftermath. And even though the world hasn't changed much, we have. I catch her staring at me sometimes, the same way she did when we were just two stupid kids trying to figure out forever. And every time she does, I feel that ache in my chest, not the painful kind, but the full kind, the kind that tells you this is what home feels like. The other day, I came home with a box of pastries from her favorite bakery, the one that's 2 towns over, just because she mentioned craving them in passing. When I gave them to her, she stared at the box for a moment, then hugged it to her chest like it was treasure. You listened, she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. And I just said, I'm always listening now. And I meant it. We talk more. About everything. Stupid stuff. Big stuff. Things that scare us. Things that make us laugh until our stomachs hurt. And somewhere along the way, I noticed something subtle but life-changing. She stopped flinching when I touched her. There was a time when my hand on her shoulder made her tense. Not because she didn't want me, but because we were both waiting for the warmth between us to turn cold again. But that fear is gone now. She leans into me, rally her arms around me at random moments, pulls my face close just to kiss my forehead like she's marking her territory all over again. And me? I've never felt more chosen. One night last week, we sat on the back porch with a blanket around us, stars above, a glass of wine in her hand, and hot chocolate in mine, because I still hate the taste of alcohol. She looked at me in the candlelight, soft and glowing, like something from a painting, and asked, if you could go back to the beginning, would you still marry me? I didn't even need to think. I leaned in close, kissed the corner of her mouth, and whispered, I'd marry you twice. Once for who you were then, and again for the woman you are now. She closed her eyes, smiled, and whispered, then maybe, let's do it again. At first I thought she meant metaphorically, but then she looked at me, serious and beaming all at once, and said, "Let's renew our vows." And I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, because I'd never heard anything more healing in my life. She wanted to recommit. Not because we had to, but because we wanted to. So we did. Just us. No crowd, no venue, just her in a white sundress and me in a navy suit, standing in our backyard with fairy lights and soft music and our neighbor's teenage daughter snapping photos with her iPhone. Anna read her vows first, her voice trembling but never faltering. "George," she said, "there was a time when I didn't recognize us anymore, when the silence between us was louder than any fight. But even then, I never stopped loving you. I just got tired of waiting for you to see me again. But you did, and you came back. Not just as my husband, but as my best friend, my home. And I promise from this day forward to never let fear be louder than love again. I choose you, always." I had to wipe my eyes before I could read mine. "Anna," I began, "I thought love was supposed to be easy, that if you found the right person, the rest just worked. But I've learned that love is a choice, 1,000 little choices every day to stay, to listen, to grow, to forgive. And I thank God every day that you kept choosing me, even when I gave you every reason not to. You are my greatest miracle, and I vow from this day forward to see you fully, to hear you deeply, to fight for you, not with you, always." We kissed as the music swelled and the lights flickered gently around us. And in that moment, I felt it, the closing of a chapter and the beginning of another. Not the end of a love story, but the rebirth of one, a better one, the kind that doesn't fade when tested, but grows stronger in the fire. Later that night, as we lay in bed, still in our vow renewal clothes, too wrapped up in each other to change, she whispered, "Do you think we'll mess it up again?" And I kissed her shoulder and said, "Maybe, but this time we'll fix it together." She smiled, sleepy and content, and said, "Good, because I plan on choosing you every day for the rest of my life." And I whispered, "Then I'll spend every day making sure I'm worth that choice." And just like that, the quiet pain that once lingered in our home finally left, replaced by something deeper, something real, something permanent. Because no matter what the world throws at us next, I know one thing for sure. This love, it made it through the storm. And I'd marry her again tomorrow without hesitation, 100 times over, because in the end, I didn't just get my wife back, I got us back.